There's nothing that I wouldn't do.
For your attention, please. Can I have your attention, please? Everybody just look at me. Everybody just look at me. I day trade attention. Shout out to Gary V. Respond to every mention. You can find me on your FYP. Before 2020, I was.
Everyone, this is, oh my goodness, I didn't start the live, but what is up, everyone? This is Let's Be Clear with Just Wayne. I'm so excited that you're here. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and the world is a scary and crazy place. It's been another crazy week of headlines and things that have been absolutely bonkers. We're going to talk about one of the biggest ones this week in this battle between Trump and the Pope, and how all of a sudden today Christian influencers were abandoning Trump. But before we get there, we're going to talk about some of the big headlines that are happening in a segment we do called The Rundown. Covering very extensively here the war, not war in Iran. And JD Vance this weekend was sent over to negotiate the ceasefire and several other issues in regards to Iran. And after 21 hours of negotiations, he was sent there to rectify a 2-week ceasefire that never existed, to end a war that apparently we've already won. And he was there for like 21 hours, 21. And in that time, he was not able to get a ceasefire deal done and to get the Strait of Hormuz back open. But that's okay, because according to the president, it doesn't matter because we've already won. We're doing so much winning.
Our country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much that we really don't know what to do about it. People are asking me, please, 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 Mr. President, we're winning too much. We can't take it anymore. Here with us.
We can't take it anymore might be the most apt way to describe the experience of living through the Trump administration. But he doesn't understand that we're actually saying, back up, we can't take anymore. Because once again, we're in a war that we didn't need to be in, to open a strait that was already open, to rectify a ceasefire that doesn't exist, and trying to win a war that we absolutely have already won. And after 21 hours of negotiations, JD Vance came out and said that no deal had been reached. And you would think 21 hours is a long time, but as a person who's been divorced, let me just say, it took more than 21 hours to negotiate out all the elements of my divorce. 21 hours is not a long time in negotiations. So much so that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was on Morning Joe this morning, and she described negotiations this way.
Deliberative process. This is hard work. You don't just show up in Geneva or Islamabad, talk for a bunch of hours and go away. This is hard, disciplined effort that has to go into diplomacy to reach any result. And I don't see this administration either wanting to do it or, frankly, being capable of doing it, because they send the same 3 people around the world, you know, 2 of them, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, you know, they're supposed to solve Ukraine, Iran, Gaza. It's a joke. The offer that was made by the...
This entire thing's a joke. We don't have the discipline to get this thing done. How do you know we don't have the discipline? You would think that with gas prices exploding, this being the biggest geopolitical issue that's happening in the entire world, there are entire nations that are on the brink of running out of oil because Donald Trump decided to start this war for no reason. You would think that everyone in the White House would be 10 toes down at the White House, hunkered in, ready to get something done. That is not what was happening over the weekend. That is the president of these United States and the Secretary of State, our top diplomat, hanging out at a UFC match while the entire world is suffering because of an issue we created. The reality is, we are not a group of serious people in this country anymore because we have an unserious set of people who are in charge of the government. We're so unserious, in fact, that not only were they at that UFC fight, but Donald Trump also announced that on June 14th, there would be a UFC fight that'll be happening at the White House. And we actually have an exclusive promo for that fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of America! President Camacho!
At this point, that doesn't even seem absurd anymore. Like, that was supposed to be an absurdist piece of art, and now it feels more like a prediction of what is to come. Now, speaking of this UFC fight, in reaction to the announcement of this fight, Hunter Biden challenged both Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump to a cage match. Now, let me just say this to the Trump boys. Do not ever in your life fight a former or current crackhead. They have superhuman strength. And the reality is, not only will you lose, but when you lose, your dad will pretend he has never met you before in his life. He'll be like, I don't know those guys. I've never heard of them before. I know they've said some nice things about Trump, but that's all we know. And speaking of forgetting who you are and pretending not to know certain people, Eric Swalwell had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad weekend, in so much that the consequences of his actions showed up. Because Eric Swalwell, just as a few minutes ago, resigned from Congress after earlier in Sunday, so today's Monday, after yesterday, ending his campaign for governor. And this came about because of multiple sexual assault allegations from former staffers. Now, he denied these allegations in a video that looked like a hostage video taken from the cuck chair in a hotel. And the reality is this: A, being inappropriate with staffers is wrong. You're in a position of power, and that position of power makes it so that consent cannot truly be reached. So despite all the arguments that folks want to have about no, argue with your mama. He's already resigned. But in addition to that, unfortunately, it was a very open secret that Eric Swalwell was not the type of person that you wanted around young women.
Every member in Congress knows not to let any young staffer get around Swalwell or Matt Gaetz. It's not a secret there. There's a reason why you didn't want those two people around.
And speaking of alleged inappropriate relationships with young women, Drake. Drake is in the middle of a rollout for his album called Iceman. This rollout has been in existence since July of 2025. Listen, it's long. And then the latest set of antics that he is doing as a part of his rollout is that he had his court seats at the Toronto Raptors game yesterday decked out and to look like they were frozen because Iceman coming. At this point, bro, just drop the album. Like, all these antics and all these memes and all these things just remind me what the certified boogeyman said about you in his response to you in Euphoria.
Once a lame, always a lame. Hold your thought, the money, the power, the fame will make you go away.
This has been The Rundown. Like I said, this week has been filled with so many different crazy things that are happening across the board. I mean, it feels like we are constantly living in a state of absolute crazy. And that crazy was on full display yesterday when Donald Trump woke up and decided that he was going to take to his social media platform and start to beef with the Pope. Which in and of itself is crazy, but not the first time. If you remember, he had that image of him in the whole papal garb that folks are up in arms about. But after that, he decided to post a picture of himself as Jesus. And so this leads us to the segment that we're doing today, Donald J. Trump, and the J stands for Jesus. Because the reality is this: Christian nationalism has long been willing to use people to accomplish its goals. Christian nationalism focuses really in on the idea of white evangelicalism. When you talk about Christian nationalists, you are oftentimes speaking very specific about white evangelicals. And yet, in that Christian coalition that oftentimes gets Republicans elected, you have Catholics, you have Protestants, you have Presbyterians, the more mainline denominations. You have some Black Christians, right? You have a Jewish coalition who are allowed to be a part of this for the sake of this Christian national agenda. But all those groups don't actually fit the vision for the Christian nationalists. The reality is that they are utilizing these groups carefully to get certain things done, but they're only being used in the moment. And a few years ago, Christians decided to place a bet on quite possibly the least Christian man to run for president of these United States because he made the decision that he was going to run as a Republican and that he was going to say that he was going to fight and protect them. They bet on Donald Trump. They decided that he was a man that could be used, despite the fact that he names oftentimes that he is not actually Christian himself.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again.
I love you, Christians. I'm not a Christian, but I love you, Christians, so much. He was very willing to be used by Christian nationalists in order to become president, and they were happy to use him because once he became president, he installed them in positions of power. So we see the likes of a Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker of the House, who is unabashedly a Christian nationalist, lives in a ministry house. We have people like Pete Hegseth, who has been installed as the Secretary of Defense, unabashedly a Christian nationalist, got up at a prayer breakfast and prayed that the enemies of God would be destroyed by the weapons of war coming from the United States of America. The reality is, Christian nationalists were willing to utilize Trump to get what they want because it was a quid pro quo in that way. And that wasn't just them using him to get into these spaces, but they implemented it across the board. And so when Hegseth, once again, Christian nationalists, started implementing some policies around who can be a chaplain, which was a big deal that came down in the last couple of weeks, and what the categories for chaplains are. When Catholics were denied the ability to have service at the Pentagon during Holy Week, all of these different things. And then when the Pentagon told the Catholic Church and an envoy for the Pope that they better get in line, that the United States military can do whatever it wants and that they must get in line with it. That's when we were in some weird spaces. They literally referenced a Pope that was kidnapped by the French to be like, yeah, get in our way if you want to. But if you do, remember that Pope who got kidnapped? Yeah, those days might come back. And so these types of threats coming from the Trump administration to Catholics would seem weird if you don't understand that Christian nationalism does not consider Catholicism a part of its community. It considers Catholics useful in the voting sense, but does not consider Catholics to be fully a part of their group. So when Trump and the Pope start beefing, because the Pope comes out and says, hey, what's happening in Iran is wrong. Like, blessed are the peacemakers is what Jesus said. So of course the Pope is going to be in favor of making peace while Trump is out here making war. And so here you have now Trump and the Pope are beefing because the Pope is like, you can't do that. And Trump is like, he's weak on crime. He's weak on other things, frankly. And there was some outrage from Catholics, but the outrage from Christian nationalists wasn't there. Why? Because to Christian nationalists, Catholics are useful, but not in community with them, which is also fascinating because the vice president of these United States, J.D. Vance, is a Catholic who was in the middle of a rollout for a book called Communion, which it talks about coming back to faith, specifically the Catholic faith. And so J.D. Vance can be used by the Trump administration to get things done, right? Stephen Miller can be used by the Trump administration to get things done. Trump himself can be used by the Christian nationalists to get things done, but they do not consider those groups of people to be truly in community with them. And they actually kind of like it when he goes after these other groups of people because they believe, evangelical Christians believe that he's one of them, or at least he will protect them. And that all came crashing down today when Trump posted this picture of himself as Jesus. Once again, Trump be posting AI depictions of himself that are weird. This one in particular was wild. And this was the line. Like, all hell broke loose when this picture dropped. And I mean that literally and figuratively. Like, everyone suddenly was like, this is wrong. This isn't okay. We can't let this happen. And like, you had the base that has backed him, that has pushed him, that has used him suddenly questioning whether or not he was experiencing demonic possession. I mean, Joel Webbin, Pastor Joel Webbin, who is a white nationalist, Christian nationalist pastor, who is one of the biggest supporters of this administration, posted this on X saying, I genuinely believe Trump is currently demon possessed. The man that they have been working with and championing and saying, he's the guy, he's our guy, he's our guy. Suddenly they're like, something else is happening here. They were calling this man the Antichrist. And Trump, who never backs down, never capitulates, never apologizes, took a step backwards. And he deleted the picture, which was extraordinary in and of itself. And the question was going to be, was he going to say anything about it? But when the White House organized this stunt with DoorDash, suddenly he was in front of reporters and they had this to ask him.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better.
And I do make people better. It's me as a doctor having healing in my hands. My hands were glowing. Yeah, my fiance grew up Mormon, and she pointed out that this particular picture with the outfit, the whole deal, is a picture that almost all Mormons have in their house, except for of Jesus, not of Trump. So whoever put that in AI, which now there's some debate about where the picture came from, whoever put that in AI very clearly was trying to depict Trump as Jesus. Now, if Trump didn't recognize that it was him as Jesus, it's because that man has never really set foot in a church before. He's not a Christian. He has no context. He has no connection to it. There's nothing about him that has any salvific or redemptive mindset or righteous mind whatsoever. So if that's the argument you're going to make, then that's the reason why. But also, are you going to let this man gaslight and lie to you? And the reality is, Christian nationalists are so hell-bent on achieving their objectives that they will lie to themselves and let this man lie to them in order to achieve a Christian nation. One of the foremost Christian influencers, Allie Beth Stuckey, put out online her own mental gymnastics around this. And she was saying, I actually don't think that this is a depiction of Jesus when posting. Still, there has to be more care and discernment. You see what she's doing there? She's letting him off the hook. And then she is using spiritual language in order to give cover and shield. Why? Because these people do not care about Jesus, about the Bible, about the church, about anything that resembles godliness, holiness. They don't want to display the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, meekness, self-control. They don't care about that. They care about pushing forward a white agenda. They want political power. And if I can be preachy for a second, a passage I used to preach all the time, it's one of my favorites, is in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1. So Jesus has raised from the dead in the Gospels. And now they are there with Jesus right before he ascends. And the disciples are like, is this now the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They're like, okay, you died and you rose from the dead and you're the Messiah. And so you're going to be the king. Are we going to do the thing now? Are we going to take over from the Romans? Are we going to destroy them? And Jesus was like, nah, it is not for you to know the times and the epochs of the Father's fixing his power, but you will receive power after the Holy Ghost has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. I find it fascinating that when the disciples wanted political power, Jesus reminded them that he was not building a political party, he was building a kingdom, and that kingdom was marked by love, by joy, by peace, by patience, by gentleness, by meekness, by self-control. Nothing about Christian nationalism, nothing about the movement that they're building resembles the life or teachings of Jesus. It is completely antithetical to who Jesus is. And they are willing to hitch themselves to the devil in order to get an agenda Done. And the reality is that when you make a deal with the devil, you look around and figure out why it's hot. And Twitter and Threads were filled with Christians trying to figure out why their feet was getting hot. But it's because he has officially pulled you into hell with him. Or you're just now realizing that you've always been there. This has been Donald J. Trump, and the J stands for Jesus. We always try to cover a lot of different things in the show, and we appreciate you being here with us. And before we go, I want to cover one more thing, because an amazing announcement came out that teen pregnancy rates are down in this country 81% over the last 30 years. That is phenomenal. That's amazing. As an educator myself, these are the types of statistics that were like, kids are not getting involved in these types of things younger in life, right? Better education, whatever the thing might be. Oh, it's phenomenal that this is happening. But for some folks, this isn't a good thing. They literally ran segments on Fox News talking about how this was bad. And then at the CPAC event this past weekend, you had a MAGA influencer who had this to say about what should be happening with families.
If you are not speaking with your family around the dinner table about these issues every day, it is high time to start. If you're not encouraging your children to grow up and have the courage to get married and have kids, more kids than they can afford before they think they're ready, it is high time to start. It is these choices, like deleting our dating apps and quitting birth control pills and saying I do at the altar, that ultimately trickle down into the political policies that we will see save our country.
This line of thinking, having people have children earlier, they literally cited 15 and 19-year-old birth rates need to increase and improve. This thinking around having kids earlier is so pervasive when you think about the fact that, like she says in this video, have more kids than you can afford before you think that you should have them. What happens when you add that with the fact that there are states that are either resisting calls to raise the age of marriage or lower it altogether? You add that with the loosening of child labor laws and cuts to, eliminating the education department and making cuts to education, and this push to increase birth rates. You put all of those things together, and what you find is a set of policies that are attempting to get people to get married super young, pregnant super young, have kids super young, without education, having to work earlier in life, and finding themselves in permanent poverty. Everything I just listed for you is a recipe for poverty. And when you are in poverty, you are beholden to the types of corporations who would love for these to be the outcomes, because having a permanent underclass is the objective. It should be noted that there is only one party and only one political movement who is committed to trying to make sure that teenagers can get married, to trying to eliminate all senses of birth control, eliminate all sexual education. There's only one party that's cutting education. There's only one party that's cutting child care. There's only one party that's cutting health care for children. There's only one party that wants to put children in a permanent position where they are getting pregnant early, marrying early, before their frontal lobes are developed, so they could be second-class citizens. And that is the Republican Party and the conservative movement. They are the ones who believe that somehow, some way, if kids are in this position, they believe it's good for Christianity, it's good for the family, it's good for God. But what they don't recognize is through all of that, they are creating the type of people who are easy to control, who are dependent on these corporations. And so while they think they're thinking family, what they're really trying to do, or what they're really doing, is destroying people's lives. Because an 81% drop framed as a negative makes you ask, who is actually being threatened by this and who's actually benefiting from it? And that has been one more thing. Thank you so much for coming to Let's Be Clear, the weekly with Wayne, the Just Wayne show. We love you so much. These are getting better every week. This has been so much fun, and we will see you again next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit us on all of our socials. Until then, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Peace.
There is nothing that I wouldn't do.
Boy, you're pretend attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? Everybody just look at me. Everybody just look at me. I day trade attention. Shout out to Gary Vee. Respond to every mention. You can find me on your FYP. Before 2020, I was doing the